Okay, I hope everyone can see that. So yeah, welcome everyone, and thanks so much for joining the Resume Review Lounge today. So let's dive into the first screen. So this is our resume workshop. So we're going to help go through some sort of tips and tricks and techniques you can use to either create or update or just hone your resume. So I know I've met a couple of you already this morning, so hi again, good to see you come back. But just to formally introduce myself, my name is Nicola Franklin and I'm the Senior Director for Talent Management at the California Times, which is the company that owns the Los Angeles Times, the San Diego Union-Tribune and several other community papers across Southern California. So I'm happy to take questions. So, if you want to use the Q&A or the chat pod, then feel free to, and I'll try and get to as many of those as we can, at the end. But other than that, I'll dive straight in and we'll get started. So let me just move this, otherwise we're all going to be looking at each other. Move that off the screen, there we go. So, what we have on the screen at the moment is kind of just a basic agenda of what we're going to be going over in today's session. So to start with, we're going to be looking at, what is a resume, or maybe more importantly, who a resume is for, what it's for. We'll look at that. We'll then look at the two kind of key areas, which is really the layout. Is it professionally presented? Is it going to create a good impression when someone looks at it for the first time? And the content, so what to put in, and equally importantly, what to leave out of your resume. And then we'll have a look at some common mistakes that we see on resumes and go through some of those. So hopefully you can avoid having them on any of your own. And then there's a slide with a few final hints and tips. And then at the end, kind of instead of thinking just theoretically like that, I have a couple of real life resumes where I've just changed all of the identifying details and contact details and things like that, so that we can look at, these are some real life resumes that we've received for jobs, and then some suggestions of how they could have been improved. So we'll have a look at those on the screen as well. So any questions before we really get started, or should we just dive straight in? No, I'm not seeing any popping up, so. Okay, all right, well, let's get cracking. So to start off, it's really thinking about what your resume is for and who it's for before you ever get anywhere near putting kind of pen to paper or starting typing. So, your brochure is really, your resume is really just a brochure, I should say. It's just a way to pique the recruiter or the hiring manager's interest so that they actually want to put you in that yes pile and want to contact you and have a phone interview or invite you for a full in-person interview. And what I mean by a brochure is it's really just a way to get your foot in the door. It's a way to get them to see the real kind of highlights, the real key skills, the main experiences, the things that really line up with what they've got in their mind that they've tried putting in their job description, or that they're thinking of that they need in someone joining their team to solve whatever issue it is they have at hand. So they have some skills lacking, they have a new product they want to get produced, they don't have enough staff to do it, whatever the case is, they have a problem, they're trying to hire to solve that problem. And when they're looking at resumes, what they're looking for is this resume I'm looking at, do they seem to have all the things we're looking for to be able to solve that problem? So what you need to do when you're writing your resume is make sure that front and center, like really jumping off the page at them, are those key things that they're looking for that are going to help them solve their problem. So that's really what you should be focusing on when you're, trying to create your resume. So it should include, relevant, and I'm going to use the word relevant a lot probably, relevant information about your qualifications, your skills, your experiences that match up with the criteria that you've seen in the job posting or in the job description as to what they're looking for. And then on top of that, obviously it should be well laid out and professionally presented so that whoever's looking at it can find that information easily without having to hunt through, great blocks of text or, where it's not ordered very well and they just can't find it because it's, on page 6 or something, and they never get that far. So, what I do see a lot with resumes is somebody trying to put in everything they've ever done. And I think a couple of those I've talked to you already. I've already mentioned that I have a very long career history. I started working in the 1990s. And so on my resume, everything before 2000 is just missing and it's just not there. So just left it off because the experience is too long ago, it's outdated, it's not relevant to the roles I'm looking at right now. And I'd recommend the same for you all. If you have a longer career history, just leave off things that are older or less relevant, and don't try and cram in everything you've ever done, every course you've ever been on, every paper you've ever written, or every place you've ever spoken, or every, tool or software you've ever used in your whole life. Because if you try and do that, your resume will very quickly end up being 3 or 4 or 5 pages long, and it will be so full of stuff, that the key points that might actually get you that interview will get overlooked. Something else that I see people doing that you should try and avoid is taking your current job description and all the bullet points of all your duties on there and copying and pasting it into your current resume and saying, hey, here's what I do. And you really need to be more selective than that and edit it more. And also the list of duties on a job description typically doesn't relate directly to the actual projects you work on. So it won't have any real life examples, it won't have any accomplishments, it won't have any results or outcomes. It's a list of inputs typically, and what your resume should be is a list of outputs. So yeah, try and avoid just copying and pasting from your job description. It's fine to look at it just to remind you, like, what's my job supposed to be? But when you're writing a resume, really focus on the actual projects and programs and products you've really worked on, and try and describe those instead. Okay. So just see if I can expand this and see if there's any questions coming through. I'm not seeing any at the moment. Okay, so to go on to the next slide here. So this is looking at kind of planning. So again, still before you put pen to paper, before you start deciding what should go in it, you really need to think about what boxes you're going to have to fill up with content. So how it's going to look, what kind of layout you want, what kind of presentation you want. So I really suggest sort of starting there, and then starting to think about the content separately, and then trying to put the two together. So you may, for example, start out with looking online, looking at resume examples, just doing an image search in Google, and you'll see lots of examples like the 2 thumbnail images that are on the screen. They'll give you some ideas of different formats, different layouts that you could use, that you could then populate with your own content. So you don't have to be a designer, you don't have to be artistic or anything. You can go online and find these layouts, and then use them, with your own content. And then when you're thinking about it from the content point of view, what I'd suggest you do is write everything down in like a data dump kind of document, which you can then edit. You can then pull from to select what you want to highlight, what information you want to put in your finished product in your resume. So just, get all the dates down, get all the projects you've worked on, all the systems you've ever used, or tools or coding languages you've ever used. You just get it all down in a data dump somewhere, and then use that to pull from to populate your layouts later. So you end up with, you'll have a layout document, a data dump document, and then your final finished product where you put the two together. So I'm not going to read out all the bullet points on the screen. I'm quite sure you're capable of doing that. I don't want to bore you to tears, but I think some of the things that you should consider with the layout are things like, think about what kind of, how you're going to highlight things, how you're going to section things out, how you're going to draw attention to the real key points. Which order you're going to put things in, the most important things you want people to read first at the top of each section. Think about what highlighting methods you're going to use. Are you going to use bold text or larger font for the headings, or italics or something? And then once you've got that, stick to it throughout. You'll see on one of the examples we see at the end, somebody used like 3 different methods, like each heading has a different way of highlighting it. So you need to kind of decide which method you're going to use and then stick to it so it's consistent throughout. which will help it look more professional than if you're kind of chopping and changing as you go through. Something else when you're planning your layout is don't dedicate too much space for your name and your contact details. You know, it's obviously important that they can contact you, but it's not a selling point. So just put it in smaller font or in a footer, or just put it all on one line and have it under your name, and just you to have that as the heading at the top, and then leave the rest of the space for more important information that is going to get your resume noticed and get you that interview. Things that you might want to make sure you do include is, I'm just thinking which section to start with. So with your skills section, I think it's important to include the technical skills that are important for the job you're going for, rather than all the technical skills you've ever had. So make sure you're looking at the job description, seeing which ones they're asking for, and make sure those are front and center. And then with the work experience section, similarly, you may just want reverse chronological order, where you put your most recent job at the top and work your way back. But if your most recent job isn't the most relevant and you're looking for a career change, or you're looking to go back and do something you did earlier, then you might want to have your current job just very small and then dedicate more space and give more weight, if you like, place more emphasis on an earlier job, and give more detail about that and less detail about a current job that's less relevant. So you really just need to think about, where do you want to sort of direct the reviewer's attention? What do you want them to focus on? And make sure you make that have the largest kind of presence, if you like, on your resume. Just making sure I haven't skipped anything here. So one thing I have seen quite a lot is a tendency to have the education at the top. And that's fine to focus on education if you're still in college or you're a recent graduate, and it may be the most relevant thing. You're looking for an internship or an entry-level role, and your recent qualification you've got is what's going to get you in the door. But if you have more work experience than that, or if your work experience is more relevant, then it's absolutely fine to have your work experience and your skills section at the top and the education section further down. So there's no hard and fast rule of you have to have all these sections in a certain order. It's fine to rearrange them so that the most relevant, that word again, piece is at the top. So I definitely suggest doing that. And then another section that you may want to include either as a separate section, or if not, you need to make sure that the content would be included in the other sections, and that's to have something about your accomplishments. So, you could have that as a completely separate area. I don't know, it could be project managing a new product that got developed that was really successful, and came in, on or under budget, or on or under time, or it could be, some other work achievement that you're really proud of, or you got invited to speak somewhere, or anything that you have that's a real accomplishment, you can put it in a separate section. If you don't have it in a separate section, then I'd strongly suggest you include it, within your work experience. Say if it's a project or a product you worked on, make sure that you explain it not just in terms of the tech you used to do it, but in terms of what user need was being solved and why the result was such a great one. So make sure you include that. Okay, so that was kind of the main points I wanted to make about the layout. So let's move on and have a look at the content. So a couple of slides with the content, and I think probably the most important point there is the top one. You really need to think carefully about what you're going to include and what you're going to leave out. It's pretty much impossible, and certainly as your career goes beyond the first few years, it's impossible to have everything in there. So you really need to curate the content that you're going to include in your resume that you want the person to see. And the way to kind of decide what you're going to leave in and what you're going to leave out is to really try and put yourself in the shoes of the person that's going to be looking at it. So the hiring manager ultimately, and the only way you're going to get a clue of what they want is from the job description or job posting that they put up. You could also maybe go look at the company on LinkedIn and find out who works there, and you might be able to work out who the hiring manager is and have a look at their profile on LinkedIn and learn a bit about them. But from those things, the job posting and the hiring manager's details, you can really get a sense of what's important to them. So you should do that before you start deciding what to include and what to leave out. And if you're trying to have one resume that you're going to use for multiple applications, then look at those job postings and say, well, what is it? There's probably some commonalities of things that are really important in the area of work you're trying to get into. And it could be UX UI designer, it could be product management, it could be software engineering, you know, whatever area it is you're looking to get into, go look at job postings in that area and see what criteria, you know, commonly come up as being really important to them, and then make sure that that's the kind of information you're including in your resume. And anything you're not seeing in any of those job postings, you probably don't need it on your resume, because if it's not important to them, all it's going to do on your resume is take up space and distract away from the key points that you do want them to see. So really try and reflect the criteria that are in the job description or job posting. And then something, again, I've mentioned to a couple of you that I've spoken to one-on-one is you may well end up needing to have 2 or 3 different resumes. So if you're equally interested in project management or product management, or you could equally be a front-end or a back-end software engineer, whatever, you know, there are 2 or 3 different kind of aligned but not exactly the same roles that you could go for, then it's perfectly fine to have 2 or 3 different versions of your resume. And then on each version, you focus on whatever the criteria and the skills and the experience that are important in that area. So you might change the order of the bullet points so that a different set of skills is at the top, or within your work history, reorder the bullet points of the different responsibilities that you had or accomplishments that you had, so that the ones that are relevant in this particular area are at the top in each section. And you may find you need to include different skills for different roles. You know, if it's project management, you need to have Jira or Basecamp, whatever you used in there. If it's product management, maybe you need to have more about user needs analysis and organization and communication skills and how you liaise between all the different groups to bring everyone together. So there are different things you might need to have in different instances. So you might leave off different things in different versions of your resume. I think some of the things that we see on resumes that you probably don't want to include, and that 4th bullet point there, unless you actually are a graphic designer and that's what you do, in which case you probably do want to showcase that on your resume by having a beautifully designed one. But otherwise, you know, try and avoid multicolors and pictures and photographs and graphic elements and things on your resume. You know, you could maybe have a horizontal line to separate sections or something like that, or basic icons for email and phone and things like that. But other than that, I'd leave elaborate graphics out of your resume, because again, they just distract from people actually seeing the content you want them to see. Yeah, so I'm just checking, making sure I didn't miss anything. So, you know, I often see, especially on technical resumes, people folks in IT roles, is in the list of duties, there's things that say, you know, I coded using X, Y, and Z languages or tools or whatever. But there isn't really a description of what that was for. So it would be better to say something like, you know, I used X and Y languages, whatever the coding tools were, to create this kind of page or this kind of app or this kind of tool, which delivered XYZ benefits to the users or the clients. So make sure you give an explanation of, okay, you use these particular technical skills, but what you were using them for and what the outcomes were or the benefits were. So make sure you kind of explain that a little bit more rather than just, you know, listing the technologies themselves. Okay, on to the next slide. Yeah, again, there's a lot about most relevant. So you always need to make sure that whatever it is, whether it's a qualification, a skill, work responsibility, or accomplishment, you put the most relevant things first. And in your education section, like you'd have more detail in here if you're a recent grad, obviously, and much less detail, you know, like mine, for example, my education is right at the bottom of my resume, even though, you know, the most recent qualification I got, I only graduated in May this year with a master's. But even so, it's still at the bottom because it's, for my position and the roles that I have, the work experience is way more relevant than education. So my education's at the bottom. But if you're a more recent grad, then you might need to have things like particular coursework projects that are relevant, or awards you've got, or Dean's List, or whatever the case may be. One thing I would say is that putting the years of your qualifications in is optional. And probably the older you get, like me, the more optional. I don't have years on mine. Just because, you know, you're handing someone information that they could use to discriminate, you know, on it and the basis of age, and it's better not to give them that, even the chance of being able to do that. So I'd recommend not including your years of qualifications. Now, one thing, and again, I've had a couple of questions on this today, is whether to include links and portfolios and things like that on your resume or your LinkedIn and things like that. So I'd say if they're relevant, so if you're on, you know, GitHub, Stack Overflow, you've got a UX UI portfolio, or you've got personal websites you've developed, absolutely include links to all of those things. If you just have like a LinkedIn profile, which is basically a duplicate of your resume, then I wouldn't necessarily say put the LinkedIn link on your resume. Where you might want to include it is if the online application you're doing has a specific field and asks you for your LinkedIn profile, then yes, by all means put it there, because they may have that link then in the ATS showing up as a clickable link and they can get through to it. But if it's on your resume, and this is a Word version of your resume, it may not be clickable and they may not be able to use it anyway. So I just wanted to address that since it had come up a couple of times.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So like with an ATS system, would you recommend using PDF or Word? Is there a preference?
Most applicant tracking systems can handle either,
okay.
And ours certainly can. And the way ours works is that from a recruiter's point of view, you kind of see a grid with a list of all the people that have applied, which is usually in the hundreds of people. Mm-hmm. And then one of the columns has a little thumbnail of the resume. You can click on it, it pops up a window and shows the resume, and then you click out of it again and go to the next person on the list, and the next and the next. So most ATSs would work similar to that. Yeah, since we're mentioning applicant tracking systems, one thing that always amuses me when I see it online is people talk about, you know, applicant tracking systems automatically filtering out people. And I have to say most of them don't. You know, ours certainly does not have, and it's one of the biggest industry standards, HR information systems, which includes recruiting and learning and all sorts of other things, and it doesn't do that. There has to be a human driving it. So it has a functionality where we can search across all the resumes on a particular job requisition. So we can put in keywords. So say, you know, having a bachelor's or having experience with certain software coding languages or certain project management tools or whatever are required, we can search for those things and it will pull out, you know, out of the 300 resumes, it'll pull out the 100 that actually have all of those keywords. But then we physically have to go read the 100 resumes to decide, you know, who we're going to invite for a phone screen or who we're going to invite for an interview. So yeah, there isn't a magic resume screening genie in the ATS, unfortunately, from our point of view, because we have to look at all these things manually and it takes a lot of time.
Perfect. That's really good insight. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think one section, it does mention it very briefly on this slide, but one section you should pay a lot of attention to is your skills section. So, you know, you may find you've got a very long list of skills, you know, and you again, you need to curate that list. So, you know, you might, for example, like look through all the duties you've ever had and think, well, what skills did I use for this? So I don't know, if you're in design, you might, one of the things you might have done is design wireframes for a new product, for example. So that in itself is something you did, but then you would have used a whole bunch of skills to do that. You know, you would have been doing You know, maybe you've used a system like Sketch or InDesign or something. You might have done user research using structured interviews. You might have done customer journey mapping. You know, there's all these different things you would have done, skills you would have used in order to be able to create that wireframe. So you need to kind of think that through and think, well, what skills am I using? Because that's what the employer's interested in, is knowing the skills that you use. Because, you know, anyone can write a design wireframes. Doesn't mean they have. But if you're listing out all the different skills that you use to do it, you know, it gives it more credibility that, okay, yeah, you've done that, you know what you're talking about, because you're describing how you got to the end point rather than just, yeah, I did this. Okay, just thinking if there's anything else on this topic I wanted to cover. No, I think we've covered everything, so let's move on to the next slide. So this is some of the things to not do. And I probably could have put a number of different slides of this as well, but I didn't want to overload you with don'ts. But I think probably the main one, that it's not actually one of the bullet points here, but I think above all, you should really try and avoid having, you know, a text heavy, hard to read document. I hesitate to use the word boring, but I guess that's where I'm getting at. Kind of like the thumbnail on the screen at the moment. You know, it just looks mundane. It looks like, you know, someone didn't really put a lot of thought into it. They're just throwing a bunch of text at the page, and they're hoping it's going to do the job. So that kind of really signposts the employer that you didn't actually make that much of an effort, or you know, which would mean you're not actually that interested and you're just applying to 100 jobs because you just want a job, you know, any job, which is the impression you want to avoid giving employers at all costs. You know, true or not, they want to hire the person that's really passionate about them and their industry and their job and really wants this particular position. So you want to make sure that's the impression you're giving them, not the opposite. Or alternatively, it might indicate you don't have very good written communication skills, which again, you don't want them to have that impression either. So, you know, I really recommend you avoid the big, you know, big paragraphs, text heavy kind of resume. And then there's a bunch of other things there, you know, like not listing hobbies unless they're relevant. Is that word again? Something we do often see is references available on request. And honestly, it's a waste of space on your resume. Like, of course, employers assume that you're going to be able to provide references if they want them. And if they want them, they will probably ask for them. So I would just don't waste space on that line. And also don't actually write out your references on the resume, like with contact details and stuff, which I've also seen, because that's just inviting a person to call your references, like before they've interviewed you or anything. And then they may not interview you. If they call a reference and they don't give you a glowing reference, they may decide not to interview you at all. So yeah, just don't mention references at this stage. That's something for much later in the process. And if the employer wants to take out references, they'll ask you for them. So yeah, don't put them on your resume. And then also, you know, your resume should be written in the third person. So you shouldn't see I, me, my, any of those kind of words shouldn't be on your resume. You know, it should say things like, you know, led this project or developed this so-and-so or whatever, not I created this. So it's just a different way of putting it. It's just a more professional language. You know, similarly, to make sure it's a professional document, you shouldn't include any kind of personal demographic information. I've seen resumes that talk about literally, I'm a married man and I have 3 children and a dog called Bruce. Literally, I've seen that. I'll never forget that. I've seen that on a resume. Don't put anything like that on your resume. But also, you know, other things like, you know, if, you know, a lot of people's faith is important to them, but you know, putting your church congregation or religious events you attend on your resume is not relevant to the job you're doing. You know, it doesn't help you do your job better unless you're applying to a religious institution. Similarly for political information, any of that kind of thing is not relevant to the job you're doing, so it shouldn't be on your resume. You know, it may be an important part of your personal identity, but that doesn't mean it's part of your work persona, if that makes sense. I'd also say don't include a picture of yourself. Either way around, whether you think you're a stunning model or you know, whatever, just, you don't want to give people that opportunity to discriminate based on what you look like. whether that's based on your ethnicity, your age, your gender, or anything. You know, don't give them that opportunity, don't include a picture. And then the last one should be self-evident. Don't exaggerate or lie on your resume, but it does happen. And, you know, I've certainly seen it as well. And there are a number of reasons. So outright lying, I mean, obviously, apart from being morally wrong, it's just a bad thing. But if you put stuff on your resume, especially if it's an actual job, or you put a job title on there you didn't have, or an employee you didn't work for, or a bachelor's degree you don't have, maybe you attended a year or two, or you got your associate's but you didn't get your bachelor's or whatever, that will get found out when they do the background check. So typically companies do a background check for everyone they offer a job to. Most companies, certainly larger companies, would use a background check vendor to conduct that check, and they will be looking to verify your social security number, checking the criminal records to make sure you haven't been convicted of anything, checking your last 3 employers, and they will contact the companies and they will look at their HR systems and they will report out the dates of employment and what job type you had. They won't comment on your work performance typically, but they'll verify the fact you were there, when you were there, and which job you had. And for your education, they contact the education institutions, and similarly, the registrar will check the records and say, yes, you were a student here from these dates to these dates, and you graduated or not with this qualification. So if you lie on your resume, it will get found out and it will result in the offer getting pulled. And it might sound like, well, why? Of course I wouldn't lie on my resume. Why are you even mentioning it? But it does happen. It has happened. In the last 12 months, we've had cases where, you know, for example, somebody said they had a bachelor's and the education institution confirmed they hadn't even studied there, and they got fired for lying on their resume. So it does happen. You might think it's safer to kind of exaggerate a little bit. You know, you've used one, you know, tool or system or something once, you're not really fluent in it, but you put on there that it's a key skill and you're really good at it. That's not going to get found out in a background check, but it would be really embarrassing if in, you know, the first weeks on the job, they ask you to use this tool and you really have no idea how to do it and you're just left like scrabbling around. So yeah, I really strongly recommend you don't embellish your resume. Okay, I think we've covered everything on there. I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything they want to ask at the moment. No? Okay. So let's just go to the last slide and then we'll start looking at a couple of the genuine resumes. So a couple of tips on here. I've had, not just today, but often I get inquiries about how long the resume should be. And in the past, the recommendation was usually for it to be 1 page. And that's for a number of reasons. You know, you typically in the past were either mailing it in or meeting someone in person and handing them a physical copy. And the idea was that you had it all on 1 page so that the pages didn't get separated, the page didn't get lost. But obviously now 99% of applications are going to be through an online system, and it's perfectly fine to have, you know, 1 document with 2 pages or even 3 pages maybe. But I wouldn't go any longer than that. You know, I have seen resumes with, you know, 10 pages, believe it or not. Unless you're an academic applying for tenured professorship and you have to list every publication you've ever, every paper you've ever published, you know, you might need a CV as such, which is longer. But outside of that circumstance, you know, try and stick to 2 pages, 3 at absolute max if you've got a long career history. And again, I'd say make sure your layout is consistent. You know, we quite often see it chops and changes throughout, and, you know, spacing's all over the place, and it's just not consistent and it makes it look kind of scrappy. So just get someone else to have a look at it, you know, get friends or family or someone else to both proofread it and make sure you haven't got any like inadvertent spelling or grammar errors and things like that, but also just to look at the layout. Does this look good? You know, maybe even ask somebody else, give them a copy of resume and say, what kind of job do you think I'm going for with this resume? And see what their feedback is. Like, ideally someone that doesn't really know what you do, like maybe a family member that's never really understood what your job is. Just ask them to look at your resume and see if they can tell you from it what kind of job you do or what kind of job you're trying to get, just to give you that outside perspective of what your resume is actually saying, because it's you know, really difficult when it's your resume and your life to kind of be objective and look at it from that kind of step back. So I'd really suggest getting someone else to have a look at it and give you that feedback. So yeah, I think that's kind of all of the main things that I wanted to cover with this. So let's pause and have any questions before we end the slide deck and then go on and have a look at some example resumes. So I don't know if anyone has any questions right now. No? Okay, well, let me end this slide share and then we can go back. Give me a second, I'm going to stop sharing very briefly so that I can close this out and get to the Word document resumes that I had ready. Okay, and then I'll share the screen again in a moment. Okay, I can see we've got a question in the chat, so let me just address that before we start sharing again. Somebody was asking if it would be okay to switch to a functional instead of a chronological resume, you know, or do employers prefer chronological? And yeah, I think in some circumstances, a functional or skills-based resume is absolutely fine. I mean, I would say you would still need to have your work history, you know, in kind of date order on the resume, but maybe on page 2. So if you're having a functional skills-based resume, then the top half, like the first section of the resume that someone sees, would be really focused on your skills and accomplishments, so that you can like pull out the key skills from all the different work experiences and education experiences you've had and put those at the top. But then you'd still need to have, you know, your work experience like underneath, so they can still see, oh yeah, this person didn't just, you know, study all these things, they have actually got the work experience to back it up as well. But yeah, the functional resumes are really useful if you're changing tack, you know, you want to have a career change, or you've had a gap where you've been, you know, either studying or had family care responsibilities and you're trying to re-enter the workforce. You know, all of those different circumstances, a functional resume can be really useful, where you don't want to have the dates at the top, you want to push them down, so you can have the functional skills stuff higher up instead. Any other questions before we go on and look at a couple of examples? Okay, all right, let me share the screen again. So have a look at a couple of resumes here. So the one that's on, I think, the left-hand side, hopefully that's the right for you guys, the right side for John Smith here. This is a resume we actually got. It arrived like this. This is what it looked like. And I mean, it's not a dreadful resume, but it's not great either. It's pretty boring to look at. And so what we've got over on the right-hand side is exactly the same resume. I haven't changed the content at all. It's just formatted differently. And the red call outs there just gives some information on the kind of changes that I've made. So, you know, the section headings are more consistent. So you'll see over on the left-hand one, we've got sentence case, uppercase, sentence case, underlined, you know, it's all over the place. There's no consistency in what the section headings look like. So on this side, you know, they're all the same, and then they're highlighted as well, just to make them pop a little bit more, make them stand out a bit more. And obviously his, you know, name's been made bigger and the address has been made smaller, just to make that stand out a bit more too. I think the only content change I made is here with reordering the skills, because computer skills were actually somewhere even hidden. I'm not even sure I can find out. Here we are. And they were, again, you just had Quark randomly in the middle of the Microsoft. So I just moved it. And I removed these two because it's kind of what you'd expect people to be internet literate these days. So like putting it on your resume or feeling you have to put that you can use the internet on your resume is almost like saying, hey, I'm old. And I think being able to use the internet is a new thing. So I took it off because that's, you know, it's really giving the wrong impression. And then, you know, it's just adding bold and making things kind of stand out and be highlighted a bit more. And obviously I don't know this person's skills, so I can't add or edit the content at all. That would be down to the individual to do. But there are maybe some things here that could be described differently or better or in more detail. I think the only other change I did was switch these around because they were in different orders. Like, so instead of having qualification institution, it was the other way around. So it was mixed up. But other than that, I didn't change it. So that was the first one. It's fairly simple changes, and it's really just formatting, but hopefully you can see it does make quite a difference, like going from a fairly plain kind of presentation to one that looks a little bit more designed, if you like. But any comments or thoughts or questions on this one? No? Okay, so let me just see if I can get the other one on the screen here. So yeah, this one is a more senior person. So they've got a lot more content in their resume. And as you can see, the way it arrived to us, it looks really hard to read. It's really dense. There's no spaces in between anything, apart from strangely at the top where there's lots of spacing for exactly where you don't need it. So again, I've reduced the space taken up by the name and the contact details. And then I've added a profile section because there isn't one here. It just dives straight into her work experience. And then I reformatted the work experience, changed it to say career history, because this is a much more senior person. They obviously have had a career. It's not just, oh, I've got a little bit of work experience after college. So I've changed the heading name and then put it into columns so it's spaced out more. There's more white space. There's somewhere to like rest the eye, and you're not hunting through this just dense list of bullet points. The actual bullet points are all the same. The content's the same. The only thing I did, as it says here, is for previous roles. She had them all in present tense, so I've changed the earlier roles into past tense. Because obviously she's not currently playing and working and securing, which is how it was to start with. So I've changed it all to past tense. And the education's tidied up a little bit, but it's not a big change for education, it's just spacing mainly. Because again, there aren't any spaces. So those are a couple of examples of things you can do just to make it easier for people to find things and easier on the eye, and so that people can see what the important information is. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the things that you can do. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on those. Yeah, I can see one in the chat, so I can read that one out, or if anyone has any live questions, happy to take those as well. Okay, so the one that's in the chat is, with bullet points, should there be periods at the end of them, the same as with sentences? Or how about a period at the end of a summary or objective statement? So with bullet points, typically not. You don't normally have punctuation at the end of a bullet point. With sentences in a summary, yes, probably you would. So hopefully that answers that one. So yeah, I know we've only taken kind of the first hour, and this was originally scheduled to be a 2-hour. But yeah, unless everyone has any questions, which I'm happy to stay and ask more questions, you know, happy to chat with anyone that's got anything else they wanted to talk about, but that was all the material I wanted to actually present today. Okay, all right, I'm not seeing any other questions pop up, so yeah, thank you all very much for joining today. It's been great to see everybody. And you know, if you do want to email with any other questions or chat privately, then you can use the talent development email that is listed on the resume review sessions. If you want to just send me an email directly, you're welcome to do that as well. But otherwise, thank you everyone for joining today. It's been great, and hopefully it's been useful. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye everyone.
We'll see ya.
Bye.